Hey, let's go ahead and get started. We're very fortunate this afternoon to have, I call them friends after, they still call me friends after they volunteered to help me. We're pleased to have Kate Kelley. She's Brigham City's new emergency manager. She's been with the city 6 months? August. So she's coming up on a year. She's going to talk to you a lot about what Bill and Don talked about as to how it relates to what the city is doing. And then she's going to be followed by a really old friend. I got figuring last night how long Mark and I have been out harassing the public, and it's almost 40 plus years. So he's going to talk about what the county's doing, and between these two, over the last, well, before Kate came, Mark started, and now Kate's bought into it. The last Wednesday of every month, the 13 Brigham City Temple stakes get together, and we discuss how we're going to move the ball for not only individual preparedness, but church preparedness and response. So my hat's off to those two for ensuring that we all get together and share ideas. And they both probably will tell you that in the business of emergency management, it is okay to steal. And so we politely borrow what other people are doing, because if you had to do it yourself, you'll never get it done. So without any further ado, and she hits me, I'll turn some time over to Kate.
You were welcome to keep talking too for the next half hour. All right, well, he gave me a great introduction. I'm Kate Kelley. I'm the Brigham City Emergency Manager. Like he said, I got on in August, so I've been with the city for about 8 months now, coming up on a year. And so I wanted to discuss today a little bit. I'll tell you what emergency management is, but I want to focus on how you fit within emergency management. So emergency management is a cycle, and there's 5 sections to this cycle. There's prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. So there's activities that take place on the day-to-day basis for each of those. It is part of my job and the job of all emergency managers to focus on these 5 areas, where it's preventing emergencies and disasters where we can, mitigating the effects of those when possible to lessen consequences and severity. So you see this a lot with public works projects trying to move water and get water in good channels so that we don't have flooding, things like that. There's preparedness actions. How can we prepare ourselves to be more resilient going forward and to be able to handle an emergency when it occurs? Response, that's the big one that everyone always thinks of, right? What are we doing when the emergency or the disaster occurs? And then recovery, what do we do to overcome from that, to bounce back? And recovery fits into the cycle along with mitigation. If you're doing a good recovery, you're hopefully mitigating the consequences in the future, putting better infrastructure in. So I could go into the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day of my job, but I do not want to put you to sleep this afternoon. Unless, because I know you've already filled your bellies probably with all the good Relief Society bread and everything in there, and get you getting your good siesta. But with this cycle, there's the 5 aspects, but the approach that we take as emergency managers, if we want to have an effective program, is a whole community approach. So I'm just one person for Brigham City. If something happens, I can't handle everything myself, and same with Mark at the county. So if we take a whole community approach, getting government and private business and individuals and community organizations together to work together, we can be the most effective. So how this works. So for local emergency response and recovery coordination, I have this little diagram so you can see where everyone fits in the best. So if you start at the very bottom, you have individual and family preparedness. That's you. There's a saying that goes, you're only as prepared, a community is only as prepared as their least prepared individual. So it's important for us to be more resilient as a community. We have to be resilient ourselves and be prepared ourselves, because if we are prepared, then hopefully when something happens or strikes, right, it doesn't hit us that hard because we know what to do and we're ready. And then so how the response works is you have your city side of things, and then you have your community response to things. So your city is going to be like your first responders, your fire, your police, your EMS, your public works guys that are going to be out there. And they're going to be doing a tactical approach, but their focus isn't going to be on you as the individual. Their focus is going to be on the incident itself. Can we resolve, like if we have a wildfire, we need to get that wildfire out, correct? If the general public safety of everyone, or infrastructure restoration, getting the power grid back up, etc. And then on the other side of it, you have the community response. You have the volunteers that come out, the groups, the faith-based organizations that look to help those community and individual needs and assistance. Let's just take an example. A couple weeks ago, we had that big windstorm that came through, right? There's a lot of people that had downed trees in the yards, etc. And there was a lot of people saying, hey, why isn't the city coming out and cleaning up my yard? Well, the city, again, their focus is on the public utility side of it. They're focused on any damage to public infrastructure, trees on the roads, if it knocked down any power lines. They're not coming and taking the tree out of your yards. That's where the community approach, we stand up as neighbors and help one another and individuals take care. And there's actually a case study that happened a few years ago out of Idaho. It was one of the eastern counties, I believe, that they had a wildfire, and there was actually a lawsuit that happened. There was a private business whose building had burned down in this wildfire because the firefighters, in fighting this fire, determined that in order to do the greatest good for the greatest amount of people, they needed to fight the fire elsewhere to keep it out of town. But unfortunately, because of that, it burned this business down. So this private owner said, hey, you didn't do your job. That's what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to come out and help me and save me. And the court case actually sided with the firefighters and said, no, there's no, as an individual, you are not entitled to have these people come and respond to you just because you ask. So it's kind of an interesting concept that we need to be prepared and respond for ourselves, because our city tactical is focused way more on the public overall good and the incident and infrastructure restoration. So what happens is we have these two responses, and then here in Brigham City, that funnels into me at the Brigham City EOC. So EOC stands for the Emergency Operations Center. So that's where I get city personnel together, and we do a few things. We do information collection and dissemination to try to build situational awareness, understand what is going on. We do planning, we do strategic planning going forward. How can we use, because we are limited on time and resources and personnel. So we have to figure out, okay, what can we do for the greatest good? And then resource allocation and tracking, managing those resources where they're at, where we can pull them in from other communities based on mutual agreements that we have, as well as taking care of our staff. And so what that does from the city levels, and that goes up to the Box Elder County Emergency Operations Center as I need to request things, to the state, to FEMA, and so on. But really the bulk of where the operations is happening is here at the bottom. It comes down to individual and family preparedness, and it comes down to the community response and tactical response. And where we're focusing on the whole community approach, I want to talk about how you fit in and where that comes in from you as a volunteer, as an individual, and from our community organizations. So, by raise of hand, who's familiar with the Teton Dam disaster in Idaho? Good, quite a few of you. So, this is a good case study when looking at this. As an Idaho native, I'm very fascinated by it. But so what happened was on a Saturday morning, June 5th, 1976, the Teton Dam north of Rexburg, a little bit northeast. It's an earthen dam structure that had started to seep a little, and as it seeped, it compromised the integrity of the structure, and it burst that morning. What happened is we had about 80 million gallons of water coming out, and when the structure failed, ultimately, it was pouring out 2 million gallons, or 2 cubic million feet of water a minute. So imagine how fast that is coming through. So it completely wiped out little communities like Wilford. Like Wilford doesn't exist really anymore. It wiped out a lot of Sugar City that's up there, flooded a lot of the lowlands of Rexburg, came down along that Snake River Plain down to Idaho Falls and south, etc. So it was devastating to the area. It killed about 16,000 livestock. If you know eastern Idaho, it's all cultural. The topsoil of the farms ripped out, homes flooded, basements full of muck. So much so, if you've seen any of the videos, it's fun. Go watch some of them. You can see houses floating down in the Rexburg streets that they're like little automobiles. The houses are just floating down the street. So it was a pretty intense disaster, but it's really cool and fascinating if you read about it, because if you look at the individual, the neighbor, and the community response to it, overall, everyone usually agrees that the Teton Dam response was a success because of these things. So back then in 76, not everyone had cell phones, right? So no one was getting notifications and no one was calling people, but people responded and acted quick. They knocked on their neighbors' doors. It's not ministering back then, it was the home teaching and visiting teaching. They went and to all the people that they visiting taught and home taught. There's so many accounts of their visiting teachers and their home teachers coming and knocking on their doors to say, hey, this is going on, get out of here. And this is a rhetorical question. No one has to raise their hand, but are you familiar enough with your ministering brothers and sisters that if you called them or came knocking on their door that they would answer the door so that you could tell them to get out, right? Or do you feel comfortable enough? And so a lot of those networks within the church for communication were huge in helping people evacuate. And like I said, it was outside of that too. It was just overall getting to know your neighbors, helping your neighbors out, member, non-member, or inactive alike. So that was the biggest deal, is that individual response. From the church perspective, as an organization responding, Rick's College was set up as a shelter and provided food. There's so many miracles that happened with that. Bishops and stake presidents were taking accountability and tracking all the people in their areas. After the fact, with the recovery, you have busloads of people from all the surrounding states coming in to muck out basements, etc. So there was a lot going on from the individual, the family, all that together. So much so that when FEMA came in, they found that everyone had taken care of themselves and basically they didn't need any help. But it was a crazy disaster. Overall, they just presumed that back then $2 billion in damage, which is a lot for the 70s. So keeping that in mind, having that kind of community here, we need to understand what's going on in Brigham City, right? So we have a few hazards. The state has determined the 9 on the left. We've got avalanche that is determined for a lot of the bench, right, on Brigham City. Climate change, take that for what you will. Dam failure. We do have the Manaway. So anyways, and then we also have Manaway Dam up the way, right? It's not a huge one, but it is something to consider if you are in the low-lying areas and along the creek here. For those that are in the South Stake, you're a little bit higher up from flooding, so you're probably fine. You have other things, though, like liquefaction and an earthquake. We'll get to that. We've got all the seasonal stuff, right? We've got drought in the summer. We've got flooding in the spring, all sorts of severe weather from windstorms to blizzards and the cascading consequences of that, right? We can get power outages, utility interruptions and failures. We have wildfires, epidemics, pandemics, acts of terrorism. The reason why I put like power cell internet outages is we are so dependent as a society today, right? Are you prepared that if power gets knocked out for 2 days that you might not have water because your water pumps are all electric, that you won't have, your fridge won't be working right, and so your food, what food do you have on hand, etc. So thinking about all those things, these are things that could be realistic things in our community that we need to focus on. And especially some of these are a little bit more individual or family focused, right? Whereas some are more broader focused, the whole community. But it's important to understand what's going on around us. And so Bill gave a great presentation, so you can fall asleep for this part real quick since he gave most of this, but I'm just kidding. But there's things that you can do as an individual and a family to get prepared at that small level. Like I said, this is the most important level. When you saw that diagram I gave earlier, it's not a top-down structure, it's a bottom-to-top structure. We truly are the most prepared when we as individuals and families are prepared. If you think that Kelley's going to come knocking on your door and save you, I got bad news for you. So you got to be prepared as yourself. So there's 12 areas of preparedness that you can prepare your family for. Shelter, clothing, and fire, water, food, hygiene and sanitation, light and power, first aid, communication, safety and security, tools and personal items, cooking, important documents and money, and transportation and navigation. So those are the areas to be considerate of. I'm just going to give a couple ideas. I'm not going to dive too deep in what you can do personally, but create those 72, 96-hour kits. They're great family home evenings. I put 96 hours there because, like Bill said, all the research is coming out that we need to be prepared for 96 hours. You might not have first responders or any help coming for that long. So, and especially be aware of exactly where you live. Depending if you live out in the county on the other side of the Bear River where there's bridges, it might be harder to access you for a while. So it's really dependent on also knowing where you personally live and what the hazards are around you. Make a family plan. You can find more research about that. Bill gave a great thing on that. Take a local course. Education and training is huge, right? If you think about just even personal emergencies, if you're at the dinner table and someone's choking across the table, who's going to respond faster? You on the other side of the table or the first responders a couple blocks down the street? So if you know what to do, so much better. So in the case of a big emergency or disaster, if we can have those basic first aid skills to be able to help our families and our neighbors, radio training, communications like Bill talked about. Get involved locally, get involved with local programs. I'll talk about that a little bit more. There's plenty of community groups to get involved with. And then plan for special needs. This is so critical because that's not always going to be considerate of what's going on, right? You might have children at school. Are you familiar with the school's reunification plans? Because you might not just be able to drive up and grab your kid. They might have their own processes that you need to be familiar with. The elderly, if there's any limitations with mobility or medications that are critical that need to be stored to be able to have in those times. And pets and livestock. This is huge in the East with the hurricanes and such that they deal with every hurricane season is pets that are left and, you know, they're not taken care of. So anyways, just some things to keep in mind at the individual and family preparedness level. Something you can do to help yourself too is become familiar with the local emergency notifications. So there's this great thing called IPAWS. I won't list out what it all stands for because honestly I can't call it off the top of my head. But it is basically a reverse 911 system that uses the cell coverage areas to be able to get to your phones. However, this is not always reliable because it is so regulated by the state that we as emergency managers can't always use it to contact you. There has to be certain requirements and there's not much redundancy, so only certain individuals can send it. And if they're not here, that's a bit of an issue. So there's these other ways that it's important to get notifications. And I'm going to add this at the bottom. It's so critical. Like I said in the Teton Dam one, not all notifications will reach everyone. So it's important to check on our neighbors and check on our families, etc., because there's some that don't have cell phones, as we learned earlier. So not everyone's going to receive everything. So first and foremost, there's the Brigham City app. It's new if you go into your app store. I believe it's just called Brigham City. You can get push notifications through that if you are signed up through that. If there's a disaster going on, we can send them out that way. The city also has Everbridge. It's an opt-in system where you sign up to receive emergency communications if there's an emergency in your area. And I will tell you how to sign up for all these later. At the county level, there's a system called Code Red. It's also an opt-in system, and it will cover greater areas. And this may change, but for now it's Code Red. And then there's also social media, right? It's a great way to receive updates. It's also a great way to learn other people's maybe misinformation that they're putting out there, but if you have good, reliable sources, like, say, the city's social media pages, that's a good way to know, too. Okay, like I said, a great way to help out is to get involved with the local citizen and volunteer groups. They are huge in helping out with the response, like I said, in those community and individual needs. So, first and foremost, there's faith-based, right? You're here, so you're probably a member of a faith, and so the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does a lot of good with the helping hands, etc. Hopefully, you each have emergency preparedness people in your wards that are helping get plans together for how you're going to check up on all your neighbors and get that information in, on checking on everyone for church leaders as well as local government people like me, so that we can have situational awareness and other things, great things like today, like little preparedness fairs. There's the Community Emergency Response Team. This is called CERT. This is a great asset for training in our community. We just finished up a wonderful course and are hopefully holding another one in the fall, and if not in the fall, in the winter. But it's a great way to learn basic first aid, basic search and rescue. It's great to know for your own training and knowledge. If you want to just keep it at that, that's fine, but they're also a team that comes together and helps with emergency projects throughout the year and might get called out to respond to things in an emergency if that's something that interests you. So it's a great way to get involved. We also have the Medical Reserve Corps. This can be for doctors, nurses, or just medical enthusiasts alike. So you can get involved with public health things at that aspect. There's the ARES, the Amateur Radio Emergency Service. The local one is the Golden Spike Club, Radio Club. They're a great way. So if you do find that you want to dive into the world of ham radios and all that stuff, they're a great way. They help with a lot of the communications that come in. And then there's Box Elder Search and Rescue. It's another way to get involved. So from my perspective as the city, so that you know, I meet every month with the faith-based organizations, the CERT team, Medical Reserve Corps, and the radio group to talk about what we can all do in our responsibilities for meeting in a disaster and what we can all do. And it's great. It's wonderful. We've built many great relationships and done so many things. And then it's good to know what each person is doing, right? So hopefully all the LDS stakes are coming together, gathering information from a neighborhood perspective, home to home. How is everyone doing? Ham radio, the radio group can help communicate that into my EOC, my Emergency Operations Center. And then the CERT teams can go out and help fill those needs, help people when they need help. And then the Medical Reserve Corps can help in that capacity and even help with like the Red Cross. That's the one I left off. There's also the Red Cross if you want to help out at the Red Cross. They have an office out of Ogden. But that's a little bit about how the community approach fits into emergency management and what is happening here in Brigham City. So I hope that gives you a little bit better information. But real quick, I'll ask if there's any questions, or otherwise I'll hand it off to Mark. Perfect. Okay.
All right. Sitting down too long and these old bones are creaking. All right. Make sure I'm standing at the right place here. There's the clicker. All right. Very good. You know, I've enjoyed working with Kate, with her as the new Brigham City Emergency Manager. I volunteered for Jim years ago when he was the City Emergency Manager, and Kate's fortunate because there's a lot of stuff that happens in Brigham City that's part of a culture that Jim had set up a long time ago, and I've been with the county for just finishing up 9 years. I had actually retired out of the Highway Patrol back in '05 and spent about 8 years as a consultant traveling around the world, eating weird food and stuff like that, and decided I got tired of airplanes and airports, and so I decided to take the job with the county emergency management when that come open back then. And so what I want to do, there's been a lot of great information over the last hour and a half here, and I don't want to slay you with any, a lot of redundancy on that there, but what I want to do is help to understand, and I don't know, it's the way my fuzzy little head works, is to be able to sometimes see the big picture, and then I can get an idea where I'm in the middle of that. And so the big picture that I want to present today is discuss a little bit of the tiered response process that happens, and the relationship from us as citizens at the local level, as we work through our neighborhoods, which here in Utah, based upon our culture, is going to be the LDS Church. It's just the reality of it. We're fortunate to have that. We do reach out and coordinate. Kate and I do with the Interfaith Council. So we're trying to bring in our neighbors and friends and of other faiths, because on disaster day, hopefully we're not, skipping over somebody when you're checking on your neighbors, right? We do find sometimes that there's some sensitivities there when the EQRT and the RSRT, that's the Elders Quorum Response Team and the Relief Society response teams, show up to do things. Not everybody's always willing to have that happen. 2017, we had a federally declared disaster with our flooding up in the Tremont and Garland area. And there was people that turned away members of a local ward or whatever, for whatever reason. And so we come around the corner and was able to bring in one of our VOAD members, Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster, one that's not been mentioned yet today, but it's known as Team Rubicon. And it's a veteran-based VOAD partner, and they were able to bring in a huge team and help muck out. I mean, we're talking with the floods, they were bringing out the sloppy, wet sheetrock and carpet and padding and wet recliners and everything out of people's basements. Cleared out 36 homes in one weekend in the Garland, North Garland area. And there were still about a handful of homes that still didn't get quite finished then, and so we was able to reload one more time with another VOAD partner known as the Southern Baptist Convention. And they brought in a disaster trailer and teams of people and was able to finish out that muck-out process. So it is truly a whole community, and our faith-based organizations throughout the country are critical. And, it's kind of interesting here in Utah. We live in the Rocky Mountains, and so we don't have the hurricanes like they do in the southeast. We don't have the tornadoes very much like they do in the Midwest. We do have some range fires once in a while, but we don't have anything like they do in California. So we're kind of fortunate in the fact that we don't do a lot of disasters. We get a little bit of puddles and water running around, creating some problems, and we do get some range fire stuff. We do have the big one looming over our head, which is what? Yeah, the earthquake, right? And I'm aware of that. I live just a couple blocks east of the high school around 4th West. Does anybody know why the ground drops like it does from the high school to 5th West and then from 5th West to 4th West? There's 2 earthquake faults that run right through there, about 600 feet from my front door, okay? And I'm in an 1893 house on a rubble stone foundation. Nobody gave me the crystal ball when I bought that place, right? So, and I still don't have it as an emergency manager. I'm waiting for somebody to invent that for us, right? Kate would like that too. Anyway, so just kind of some example of some of the stuff here. Let's go ahead and move on here and kind of bring up some, maybe. Now, and I have to apologize. After Kate's presentation, and I have to hand it to Kate. She's an educated emergency manager, okay? I'm an old dog emergency manager. And if you think about emergency management, it come out of the old civil defense days, right? And some of us have been around long enough can remember those days and the Tommy the Turtle and the duck and cover stuff. Well, after that stuff kind of settled down, we needed to do something, and it evolved into emergency management. And for the longest time, we moved away from the military folks who kind of come out of that civil defense era into retired police officers and firefighters and so forth. And my background was with the High Patrol. I never was assigned to traffic division, so I never wrote a lot of speeding tickets. I worked truck enforcement and hazardous materials. And I got pulled into the state emergency management office in 2000 because we were doing all the counterterrorism planning for the Olympics and so forth. So that's kind of where I got into the emergency management business. But again, understanding that evolution as for emergency management and who we are and where we come from. And so now we've got this new generation of educated emergency managers. And I bring that up because if you look at the presentation that Kate just had, and you look at the crayons and white paper that I was able to pull together, you can kind of see what the difference between old dog emergency manager and professional emergency manager do. So anyway, in my fuzzy head here, as we look at disasters, we live on a spectrum, right? So on a day-to-day basis, you might have a boo-boo, right? What do you do about that? Hopefully you go to your medicine cabinet, you got a first aid kit, and you take care of it, right? If in the process of you got a concern about having a potential fire in your house, what do you go out and equip your house with? A fire extinguisher, right? And if you think that you might have some water running around your yard in a spring runoff or a heavy storm and you've had flooding before, what are you going to have on hand to kind of take care of that stuff? A pump, sandbags, or something like that, right? We need to kind of move past it, and we've got a world that's kind of inching towards this direction that it's government's job to solve everybody's problem. And we just don't have that ability to do that. On this lower end of the spectrum, there's a certain amount of personal accountability. But sometimes we get up into emergencies where all of a sudden it does overwhelm our personal capability. What do? Call 911, right? And our first responders show up. So we have a certain amount of tools in the toolbox. Now, Brigham City has got the biggest toolbox in the county, right? Bigger population, bigger jurisdiction, and so they've got more tools in that toolbox. Followed by Tremont, be the next one. County's got a similar size in that area, not quite as big as Brigham City. We got deputies and we got some road department folks. No parks and recreation, okay? But as emergency manager, my job is the same thing as Kate's relative to the citizens in any unincorporated county. So all of the, like Beaver Dam and Riverside, Thatcher, Penrose, Bothwell, little places called Park Valley and Grouse Creek, there's some issues out there. Those are unincorporated jurisdictions. That falls directly within my purview as the county emergency manager. But I also have the role of the next step up in the tiered process. So we go down here and look at this emergency that happens, and on a day-to-day basis, those first responders do their business. They're out there all the time. And who is it that controls them getting out to the job and so forth? It's going to be dispatch, right? And we run by a state dispatch center here. So dispatch manages the ebb and flow of those resources on this lower level. But in this world of what if, and this is what I call my what if world, what if we have an emergency big enough happen in Brigham City that all of a sudden we've tapped out Brigham City's resources? Now what? We have a little thing called mutual aid, and dispatch has kind of a pulse a bit on that. They actually, through agreements and everything else, we can bring in Perry City or Willard City or the county or the Highway Patrol. Anybody that we've got within the county, through the agreements and everything else that we have, it's easy to kind of ebb and flow. So we kind of move up that spectrum a little bit, but it's still kind of managed, kind of at that local level. But the real place when emergency management kicks in is all of a sudden when we don't have enough resources within the county to handle something. And that can happen a couple of ways. That can be something really jihugic happen here in Brigham City, and jihugic is an official emergency management word, okay? If something is that bad that happens in Brigham City that we're having to bring and you're never going to get all of the resources because we got to hold back a little bit some, because guess what? We may have a problem here in Brigham City. People are still going to have heart attacks and day-to-day problems, elsewhere. So you can't ever send all your tools to the fight. So then that's where emergency management kicks in, because by that time, Kate and I have already been talking about things, and if the toolboxes are empty, there's nothing else left, then we fire up the relationships that we have within the northern region. And back when I worked for the state years ago, I happened to have the tasking to create 7 Homeland Security regions in the state. And so we clumped these counties together, and our northern region is Davis, Weber, Morgan, Box Elder, Cache, and Rich. All of us emergency managers work together. We talk, we coordinate, we communicate, both at the county level, and we have the city emergency managers that get involved. We're kind of a behind-the-scenes invisible network, and in that process, we anticipate these bigger events and start to work, and we develop the plans and the relationships and the processes by which we try to arrange for the cavalry, right? So if we ever have to call the cavalry to come in, there's a couple factors we have to consider. And that, number one, is the distance that they have to come from. The farther that resource has to come from, it costs us what? Time. It's going to be longer before the cavalry is going to get here. Now, if it is just a Brigham City or a Box Elder County problem, Cache County, Weber County, our counties north of us, Oneida and Cassia, and even Elko County. I work with those county emergency managers as well. If I need to reach out and call and bring in resources from there, that's nice because they're our neighbors. But if our disaster is big enough that it's affecting them, can I call my neighbors and ask them for resources? No. We had a windstorm here about 3 years ago. Okay, we had trucks roll over on the freeway here down south of Willard, down by Rocky Point. We had about 3 miles of power lines down Highway 89. Everybody had trees on top of them, right? And so we were trying to deal with this, and it would have been absolutely silly for me to be calling any one of my neighboring counties to see if they could help us out. So I had to then jump up and go right directly to the state. They then crack open their processes, and they were not only trying to help me, but they're trying to help everybody else that's still in the fight too. But they're now talking to counties within the state to see what could be brought in to help us in the north end. They start what they call an EMAC system, which is a state-to-state mutual aid, which starts bringing in resources, right? And then if that's not enough, they can reach up and hit that big federal button called FEMA, okay? And I'm going to tell you, after 2017 floods, I never want to hit that button again. We always think, we hit that button, we get this federal aid, and all this stuff. You can't believe the paperwork that it comes along with that. And when it got all said and done, we all sat back going, I'm not sure it was worth doing that again. And so our county commissioners are kind of like, please don't ever hit that button. We'll do whatever we need to pay for this disaster if we can, That's that process, as we look at this thing here. Now let's talk about farther up this spectrum. I mean, there's no pointer on this. Oh, there is I need a very good pointer. Okay, never mind. I'm going to have to just point to the bigger yellow thing up there, right? So as we move up that spectrum, if we get the point, we've got things that are happening clear up into that level. This is huge. This is when we get the point that not only do we not have enough resources to solve the problem, that this is big enough, we don't have the skill and ability to manage that big of a situation. And so we have access to incident support teams that can come in. So a type 5, which is day-to-day stuff, and a type 4, which is bigger day-to-day stuff, a train crash or a hazardous material spill, something like that, it's going to be handled at our level. But we get the point of getting halfway up into that thing. We're at a type 3 incident. We may have to bring in a state type 3 team to help us as emergency managers be able to deal with this, because it requires a skill set, because we're no longer talking about managing a few dozen resources or a couple hundred resources. If it's a big enough disaster, we're managing thousands of resources. And that's a skill set. We just don't do it on a regular basis like that. And we go clear to that point to where you're up to that biggest level, we might have to bring in a federal incident management team. And we hear about this all the time on the news. You see them in those wildfires in California. You'll hear them referring to that they brought in a type 2 team or a type 1 team. And these are folks that have that skill set to come in. And we work with our elected officials. We're working with the emergency managers, and we're trying to get our head around the scope and nature of whatever that disaster is, right? As an emergency manager, situational awareness is probably one of the more critical pieces that we need to have, because in order to know what our next move is, we got to have that. And now let's bring it back down to the local level. This is where we as emergency managers rely upon our citizens, and through our organization, through the church, that rapid damage assessment process of you checking, make sure I'm okay, and then willing to come together with the ward, and you're checking the rest of your neighborhood, letting us know what happens, advising us, or if we've got roads that are impassable, if we've got power lines down, if we've got infrastructure, natural gas lines, sewer lines, water lines down. We need to know this stuff, right, in order to do it. And in the big event, let's just say we do have the big rumbler, right? Brigham City, Perry, Willard, Manaway, Deweyville, Honeyville are all going to be dealing with the fault-related stuff, right? And then what's going to be happening out in the towns out in the flatlands. They call that liquefaction because we live on a lake bed. Anybody ever gone up next to a river stream, step on kind of the moist sand, and you start wiggling your sand or your foot, and that sand turns into quicksand, okay? That's what happens out in the old lake bed stuff. I think we ought to get auto leave to build big airbags to put around the foundations of our houses, and so when it rumbles, we get the big no. But that's a reality. So when you talk about the impacts of an earthquake, you got the impacts of the fault line itself, but then it's gonna impact communities that aren't right here by the fault. Okay, this stuff is gonna shake everybody out through the valley, right? And it's going to shake Weber County and Cache County and everybody else. So you start to see that this becomes a big situation. And as emergency manager, I need to get a pulse on what's happening in all of the cities and towns in the county. And in an earthquake, there's a fair chance we don't have power. You may not have your cell phones work. Power, the internet's going to be gone. And so we have to build in those redundancies. Other resources that we can rely upon to help us, and we'll talk about that. I'm going to submit that there's a place on the far end of that spectrum. Now we can have a discussion whether or not we really are going to hit that, but that's that dinosaur extinction asteroid, at which point you just, okay, we're getting mass transfer to the spirit world, right? So that's kind of the way it is. But on that upper end of the spectrum, there's just not enough help on a local level, and so when we talk about bringing the cavalry in, sometimes we have to anticipate that if we get hard enough here in this part of the area, our help's going to come out of Boise, out of Portland, out of Seattle, out of Montana. Okay. Meanwhile, we're going to be, Denver, be shooting stuff in from the east, Las Vegas, California coming out of the south, Reno, San Francisco coming in from the west. That's what it will look like. And as emergency managers, we just kind of hope we never have to deal with that. But that's kind of the reality of where we're at and what we live with. Okay? All right, let's move on to here. So you've covered all this stuff, but I just want to reinforce the more, and I don't want to preach into the choir. Thanks, Jim. Preaching to the choir here. Y'all are here because you have a passion for it, you understand it, and so you're here. I just wish we could get everybody else in the world here with you to have that same kind of a passion, right? So there's a lot of resources out here as well. And we've already talked about the emergency notification. We just need everybody, get signed up to receive these notices. Back in the days when we had landlines, your landline would have automatically been in the system, but because we have cell phones, you have to sign up for this notification process, okay? And Brigham City uses Everbridge. They can send out community information and alerting. The code red is the same thing. It's purchased for the region. It's actually available for Brigham City. They figured Everbridge would have met their needs better. And I am the IPAWS person for the county, and we are in the process of expanding. Dispatch will also be an IPAWS notification. That doesn't require us to have anybody sign up. We can just simply take over the cell towers and send out messaging. But as Kate alluded to, it's got a higher threshold. It has to be more of an imminent hazard. We can't just send out a message that, hey, look, the electrical folks are going to be working on traffic lights or, this or that or the other. It's got to be an imminent hazard kind of a deal. So there's a couple ways we can get to you. I wanted to bring down your attention to the bottom here. We have 9 AM radio emergency transmitters in the county. And they live anywhere on the 1600 area of the AM radio dial. Now, there's enough gray hair here in this room. I think most everybody understands what AM radio is. If you don't know what AM radio is, I'm going to tell you, back in the day, that's where the cool music was at, okay, before it went to FM. It's old school technology. These are low 10-watt transmitters. But you can go, so we got one in Willard, Manaway. Brigham City's had one for a long time. In fact, we're going to have some tuning up done on that there. I was actually out there yesterday, and the first thing I had to do was fight the battle with all the hornets in there. But I didn't get stung. Honeyville's got one, Thatcher, Fielding, Howell, and Snowville. Okay, so there'll be one of those there. But besides that, just other information that's available is going to Brigham City's website. There's preparedness information there. I've got on the Box Elder County website, I've got preparedness information there. And I just am rolling out this week until I found a glitch. So you're more than welcome to do this right now, but you got to navigate the glitch. But we've created a Box Elder County Prepared app, which if you go into your, and I've done this with Google Play. I don't do iOS because I don't live in the Apple world. I'm sorry, but just that's not where, I'm just not that high up in the world yet. So I have no idea about the Apple stuff. So anybody wants to try this and let me know if you can get an Apple app, let me know. But otherwise, you search for Box Elder Ready. That's the snafu in this thing here. That's the mess up in here. Box Elder Ready. And then when you get the list of apps that are there, you want to pick the Box Elder Prepared app. And when you download that app, then you've got a tool at your fingertips. There's a library of information there about the types of disasters and emergencies you may face. And there's actually tools in there that allows you to develop your plans, pull together all the information that's been alluded to in the past. That information doesn't go anywhere. It just stays on your phone. And on disaster day, you may not even have connectivity to the internet, but you have information there at the tip. You got a little library and your personal plans right at your fingertips that will still work even if everything else is down. Just going to have the ability to recharge that. Okay, we're out of time, and of course, emergency managers used to give us. We can go on and on and on, but we are here to help, and preparedness is a big part of that. Piece of what we do, besides organizing our governments and so on and so forth. So if there's anything else that we can do as a city or a county emergency managers, please don't hesitate to give us a call. Thank you very much.
I still can't get Apple to work.
Okay, we've got to get figured out.
Any questions for him? Okay. Next presentation, I'm sorry.
Just for a minute.